Good evening. Today is April 6th. S&P 500 made another new high this morning and then basically traded in a narrow low volume around 15 points trading range. We closed down a few points. Russell and NASDAQ also closed down a few points. So not much happened today in the markets. And Bitcoin again came close to 60,000 level and again just sold off there. It's been for a week, about a week now that it's trying to cross it and just can't. Meanwhile, actual gold keeps showing some signs of life as of late. It was up a little bit under 1% today, and it looks like 1700 level has been defended for weeks now. So we'll see if it will muster up some run from here. And bonds had a nice up day as well. Meanwhile, our favorite Dr. Doom was on TV again. What else is he gonna do, right? And somebody asked him about why are the Texas COVID cases dropping despite of them ignoring his advice on masks and social distancing. And so his reply was basically, well, it's confusing. You have to wait weeks sometimes before you see the effects. I'm not really sure. And so it's been over 4 weeks and we still don't see any increase in cases. So I'm not exactly sure what he's waiting for. And it's basically, we have lost touch with any objective reality at this point. There is no any standard for objective truth. It doesn't matter how much evidence you show that masks didn't help, it doesn't really matter. As long as there's some guy on TV telling you, or a girl on TV telling you some truth, that's the only truth that matters, not the objective real truth. We're society as seen on TV. And more information is coming about Archegos fund liquidation. Apparently, Morgan Stanley was the first one to liquidate their position. They were the largest holders of their prime broker funds, and they could have lost $10 billion if they had not acted quickly and liquidated quickly. They sold about 5 billion in shares on Thursday night before other prime brokers had a chance to liquidate, and hence they got a better price. They have offered the shares of the market to some hedge funds at a discount, telling them only half truth. They told them that some fund needs to be liquidated, but because it's a margin call, but they never told them that there is a lot more stocks to come. And so now hedge funds are pissed at Morgan Stanley, but according to the people, they're not pissed enough to leave Morgan Stanley because they want to be able to have access to the hot IPOs that Morgan Stanley, being the top banker in US, can dole out. And related to Archegos liquidation, I see a lot more people getting concerned about high level of leverage in the markets, as well as a very low level of liquidity. Market depth is going down as leverage is going up. And forced selling, it seems that forced selling is likely, if it were to occur, to cause reflexivity and to cause the market to crash, given the high extent of leverage, the low market depth, the highly correlated assets. If you reach, just like the Viacom stock has shown, that in 3 days, the market plunged as much as it gained in 3 months. It's not normal liquidity. And that with them liquidating to funds of the market. And I remember a while back, Victor, you were mentioning that you have noticed that market depth has been decreasing lately and getting worse. Is that a concern to you?
It's always a concern to me when the top feeders don't make their fair share of profits from the bottom feeders, that the strong don't take money from the weak. And volume today was only 1,200,000 shares, and there was a very small range of 24 points. We're accustomed to 50-point ranges, 100-point ranges, and during those 50 and 100-point ranges, there's a lot more opportunity for the strong to create havoc among the weak, to give them margin calls, to have them stopped out at the worst prices. And so the market is not happy with this, with a small range, and they'll have to make up for it in the next 2 or 3 days. However, you have to admit it was a very woke day. Very woke day, and especially near the end, President Biden, when asked about the Atlanta voting rules and whether he approves of the fact that all the profit-making companies are heading back against Atlanta, and what he said was, "Stop it, stop it." And then it seemed to me he couldn't remember Janet Yellen's name. He said he didn't speak to Jay Powell, thank God. Although if he speaks to the Secretary of the Treasury, but he seems to have forgotten her name, he said, but I have spoken to, then he stopped. And then he added, when they, in that context, he brought up the fact that unlike the former president, he doesn't talk to the attorneys general, tell them what to do. And so he made a gratuitous disunity thing. So it was extremely woke. And there's a pandemonium now. Senator Cruz and the former president are calling for a boycott of all the Atlanta, of Delta and Coca-Cola, and the big companies. Of course, 95% of them are supporters of the progressive administration. So they're they're in a pair of pants between the devil and the deep blue sea.
So are you saying you disagree with Trump and Cruz calling for a boycott, or do you support?
Well, they're fighting fire with fire, and the whole economy would disintegrate. And it's sort of typical of the former president to take vengeance on it. The one very
Well, but you know the whole firefighter story. The whole forest is burning and you're in the middle of it. The only way to survive is to fight fire with fire. So maybe we are at that point where it's just inevitable, because Republicans have been rolling over pretty much on everything. So maybe it's time to fight back fire with fire. Otherwise, we're all going to get engulfed into the pit.
The one very good thing, I think you'll be very happy, the presidential election betting odds moved up about 5% for DeSantis versus Trump. It's now as likely that DeSantis will get the GOP nomination as it is that Biden will get the Republican nomination. Harris is 20% versus 16% to be the next president, and DeSantis is 15% versus 20% for Trump to get the GOP nomination. So I think that's very good. He defended himself very well, and there's a lot of misinformation. To me, the situation is very similar to what occurred in this very important book written in the 1950s, which describes the current situation where businesses are going out of business, and there's more progressive spending. So take a listen to this.
Jack had, after all, found a dead body, and it had disappeared. He had to report that, but we decided on the way down in my car that he'd report just those bare facts, nothing more. He couldn't explain his delay in reporting, so we decided he'd alter the time sequence a little and say he found the body last night instead of the morning before. It might just as well have happened that way. Even at that, there'd be a little delay to account for. Why hadn't he phoned the police last night then? We decided Jack would explain that Theodora was upset and hysterical. He couldn't think of anything else that she was taken care of, and had rushed her to a doctor, me. She'd had a bad shock, so they were staying at my place. And Jack had gone home to pick up some clothes before phoning the police, and then he discovered the body was gone. He figured Grivet would bawl him out a little. There wasn't much else he could do. Smiling, I told Jack to act as dopey and absent-minded as he could, and Grivet would put it all down to his being an impractical literary type. Jack nodded and smiled a little at that, and his face went serious again. Forget the fingerprints too, you think, when I talked to Grivet?
Alexa, skip 2 minutes.
Chapter 9. But I was in a bad mood when I parked my car on a side street near my home.
Okay, this is what Dr. Jack
Worry,
sees.
and fear were twisting
Same
through
thing
my
that
mind
we're
when I
saying
walked
in the
the block and a
economy.
half to the office.
Very
And
woke.
the look of Throckmorton Street depressed me. It seemed littered and shabby in the morning sun. A city trash basket stood heaped and unemptied from the day before. The globe of an overhead streetlight was broken, and a few doors from the building where my office was, a shop stood empty. The windows were whitened, and a clumsily painted "For Rent" sign stood leaning against the glass. They didn't say where to apply, though, and I had the feeling no one cared whether the store was ever rented again. A smashed wine bottle lay in the entranceway of my building, and the brass nameplate set in the gray stone of the building was mottled and unpolished. All up and down the street, as I stopped for a moment to look, not a soul was out washing down a store window as the shop owners usually were of a morning, and the street seemed oddly deserted. It was simply the mood I was in, I told myself. I was looking at the world in fear and worry, and I reprimanded myself. It's no way to let yourself feel when you're diagnosing and treating patients. A patient was waiting when I got upstairs. She had no appointment, but I was a little early, so I worked her in. She was Mrs. Seeley, the quiet little woman of 40 who had sat in this same chair a week before telling me that her husband wasn't her husband at all. Now she was smiling, actually squirming with relief and pleasure as she told me her delusion was gone. She'd talked to Dr. Kaufman last week, as I'd suggested. She told me he hadn't seemed to help her much.
Yes, that's Invasion of the Body Snatchers by Jack Finney, written in 1955, very applicable now as businesses show lassitude. There are for rent. It's a perfect indication of New York City. Will get worse with the tax increases that they're thinking about in New York. They think of New York as boppos that they can just hit around and take as much energy away from them. And look, let's face it, it was a very woke day. The President Biden, the only thing he could say was that Senator McConnell had come to him begging for some compromise that only it was the extreme right wing that that didn't want to take the vaccines. However, because of its wokeness, I'm bullish. I'm bullish. It was we had our down day. It was incredibly lax, incredibly small. It's ridiculous to have such a small down day when you've been up 150 points. They can only get NASDAQ down a 0.25%, and the S&P was down 0.05%. So anybody who was hoping that they could cover their shorts after a down day, they had their down day. But what kind of down day was it? It's still up 150 points and at an all 0.1% from an all-time high. Everything's going up. Bonds were way up. Crude was up. It was almost a Baron Coleman day. It was almost a green day, but it was stocks were down 2 or 3 points. Spirit of a green day, and we should have a good update tomorrow. Now, should we hear from the man whose name shall not be mentioned, because although he's the greatest statistician, and I consider him the greatest genius of the 19th century, a man who was responsible for so many contributions in addition to regression and correlation, discovered fingerprints and weather maps and the theory of association. And should we have a quote from him about why the market has gone up so much, or should we have another Tom Wiswell proverb? What do you say?
The quote, why the market is up so much.
Okay, from he who shall not be named. The conditions that direct the order of the whole of the living world around us are marked by their persistence in improving the birthright of successive generations. That's basically Siegel's recent book on the cause for optimism, and Ridley's book about the rational optimist. So he says, everything's getting better. They determine at much cost of individual comfort that each plant and animal shall on the general average be endowed at its birth with more suitable natural faculties than those of its representatives in the preceding generations. They ensure, in short, that the inherent qualities of the terrestrial territory shall become steadily better adapted to their homes and to their mutual needs. That's a better reason for the 50,000-fold a century drift in the stock market. If only the people who have the English disease, if only the Dimson, Marsh, and Staunton would, instead of coming up with in every one of their subsequent reviews that show this 40 to 50,000-fold drift, they keep saying, well, it was up 40 to 50,000 in the last 105 years, but for the next 5 years, you can expect it 3 or 4% more. They call out the fact that dividends are going to be less, or the earnings price minus interest rate is getting reduced. But that's it. What Ridley said, the rational optimist. Things are so much better. As Deidre McCloskey points out, when you think about the average improvement in material well-being in the last 100 years, it's about 12-fold in terms of food and housing and plumbing and clothing, the things that people spend that provide for their welfare. He says, but when you take account of the fact that population is 2 to 3 times greater than it was 100 years ago, we've really had a 24-fold increase in material well-being. And I think that, and Galton, I mentioned he whose name shall not be mentioned. He describes the reason for it, that every generation adapts a little better to the conditions of life, and there are geniuses and productive people. Julian Simon, who make tremendous contributions, like Musk, so many others. But anyway, things are getting better, and the stock market, it's amazingly resilient during the worst decline in economic activity that there's been in the last 10 years, when it looked like all businesses were going to go out, were going to go down, when we were losing millions of jobs, when the government was increasing their control and the progressivism and their interference with the economy, when things were the worst in March of 2020, the market has been up 60 to 70% of the days. It's had a nice 50% rally since then. And now when it's in the opposite situation, where the economy is going through the roof, where unemployment keeps going down, and where industrial production is way up, and now we're in the opposite situation, and the market just broke through 4,000, going to 5,000. So you have to give it a cheer. You have to be humble, and don't worry about all these things about excessive optimism, or all the churning, all the money that Morgan Stanley forced their counterparts to make. I wish someone would force me to take all these stocks at a discount of what they must have got. They must have got a 20 to 30% discount on it, and
But
since
do you
then,
think that Viacom,
what?
well, you know, the Viacom, for example,
Yeah, I know all of them.
right? So is that a good buy? Because it's been down.
Yes, of course, it was down from 100 to 40. That's a great thing. It has a lot of communications and cable, and eventually someone will, as CBS, eventually someone will buy them out, buy division out. So I like Credit Suisse also. They lost $5 billion, but it only affects brings their book value down to 18 and 19, and they're selling a little bit below 11. Their business was their business is intact. They were having their best quarter ever. So yeah, that's a great time to buy stocks. As I mentioned, like Victoria bought Chipotle, I think, when they had some bacteria in their meat. She bought it around 400, down from 700 on the bacteria in the meat is now 2,000. So, but when there's a decline for a reason, a non-recurring reason, that's a great, and the basic business is intact, as cruise companies, all those stocks are up 100, 200%. Great time. But now we're in the opposite situation. Everything's going through the roof, and yet the market continues to go up. So we have to be optimistic, have to be humble about the resilience and the triumph of the optimists.
Yes, and to that point, you have mentioned Elon Musk and optimism. He actually had a discussion on Twitter with Kathy Wood about the unusually high ratio of S&P market cap to GDP, Warren Buffett's favorite indicator. And Elon Musk was asking, what does she think? And her point is that GDP is kind of an outdated statistic. It doesn't keep up with the digital age. It's made during the industrial age. And now in the digital age, it's not adequate anymore because we have different
It
productivity.
was never adequate. It was always a ridiculous thing. Or it was Tobin who came up with it about 20 years ago. And since then, the GDP is up about 2% a year, and the stock market is up 10% a year. It was never tested. There was never any, it was a completely cockamamie, charlatanish technical indicator that had no basis whatsoever in the real life, and has nothing to do with the return on capital and interest rates, and it was the kind of thing that someone suggested that we start a petition to ban Benjamin Graham's book, The Intelligent Investor, and security analysis, things that Warren Buffett used to use before Charlie Munger, and the only intelligent thing he ever said, aside from the fact that he loved my book, and he learned about Niederhofer and things from my book, that he said, Warren, why the hell are you buying all these regional department stores that are selling at 40% of book? Are you using up all your money? He says they're at 40% of book and they're going to go out of business, but you're spending your money there. And of course, he had tremendous tax benefit. He had a few hundred million of tax losses to carry him on his woke way, and but eventually he started buying companies like forever companies that were even that was second worst to the ones that Graham and Dodd recommended, and he bought a railroad company, and I still get it advertised. I mean, in addition to the fact that I lose subscribers every day when I mention, it's amazing that the algorithms were able to figure out who that quote was from, and they take away. I had, like, when I said that we should all pay homage to the triumph of the stock market and going above 4,000, and it shows tremendous resilience, tremendous strength. I had 12,000 impressions of a 12,000 people, but yet I lost about 100 subscribers because of us, because they must realize that when I keep saying that woke is good for the market, they must have some artificial intelligence that is able to unravel the mordancy and the double entendre of saying that you hope for woke. But today was great. It was a tremendous. The market tried to go down. It couldn't even break the Soji number at, 40.50. And it got down to 50.52, but like magic, there was a gravitational pull of the old highs came into play, and it didn't get there. And then with all the woke things and the forgetfulness of Janet Yellen's name, and the pants thing that he gave to McConnell, and still you would think that he would know it's creating tremendous havoc, a brouhaha. Half the country wants to stop patronizing half the country, and you would think that he'd say something. Well, he understands that that the Masters Golf Corp is in Georgia, and that people have a right to play golf. Fortunately, he didn't call out the former president, who's well known for his excellent golf game, although it's quite invidious. Everybody who's played with him has said that he's the biggest cheater in the world. A lot of my friends have played with him, and they talk about the fact that if he hits one in a pond, somehow the ball, his caddy puts the ball in the hole, and then he ends up as the number one player at the club. Anyway, you would think that the president would have said, well, no, we don't want to interfere with the marketplace, with people buying what they think will give them benefits, and spending money, mutually beneficial exchanges. You'd think he would say something like that, but no, instead he said, stop it, stop it. That to me was the most woke thing that I've seen, except for the fact that Cuomo seems to be able to get away with serial infractions, the kind of things that former president would have been impeached in 1 hour for. But Stop it, stop it. That's the highlight of the day. Now you want to hear one more proverb from Tom Wiswell, or should we call it a day?
Oh, well, might as well. Let's hear it.
Okay, let's see. Tom Wiswell is was a world champion for 25 years, undefeated. Who has been my toughest opponent? That's easy. It's old man Father Time. Eventually he checkmates everyone, and that should come as no surprise. And then he mentioned there was a champion in checkers named Asa Long, who at the age of 20 won the national checker championships, and he won it also at the age of 90. So there was a 70-year difference. I remember the last time Tom came to our office after 25 years, coming once a week. He was in his 80s and he had dementia. He said, Victor, I couldn't remember what floor you were on. And he was on the elevator for about an hour trying to find where our office was. I wish I could have helped him more than I did. But as he always said, I've written 21 books, and if I'd met a girl like Susan, I would have been happy, but I wouldn't have written the 21 books. But he always thought that his book of Proverbs, the ones that he wrote for me, would be his best book of all. The last thing he said was, old friends, he has so many friends, he says, so many good games, so many exciting highways and byways. He says, I think I'll take off my hat, he said, though, and call it a day. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Good night.